we do have somebody who is actually in elected office in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and he is running to be their next governor. Whether he wins or loses, he's going to have a massive platform to talk about the inequitable differences within our society that should not exist anymore. Somebody who's an avowed democratic socialist.
Well, and you know what? And I really was going to not even say that because I hate the labels. I hate the terms. But this is somebody that has self-proclaimed. I hate that because he agrees that people should have things like a dignity and a certain basis of living and, like a civilization. So, where he's not talking about like workers owning the means of production. I hate the labels. But anyway, so this is somebody that I know is very pro-labor, which is awesome.
Essential.
Yeah.
If you're going to have a D in front of your name, you should be pro-labor.
Well, we are supposed to be the Labor Party, which we're not.
Well, this is why it's going to be very interesting to see how everything unfolds with the whole GameStop situation, because you're in a situation right now where the Democrats are going to have to take a position on this.
Democrats don't take positions. See, here's the thing. If the Democrats were actually doing what they were supposed to be doing, then people wouldn't need to distinguish themselves as a democratic socialist. You would just be a Democrat and we would have a social safety net and, there would be a labor, support for labor. So
Lee, at least you're in a state that I think is somewhat receptive, more so than the state of Florida when it comes to the need for, I would say a workers' I don't want to say revolution, but I guess in a way it's just kind of heading in that direction. But we both happen to be from states that have the horrific right to work law. And I think we should get right into it, obviously introduce yourself.
Yeah, no, let him introduce himself. He hasn't even been able to say anything.
Please do, Lee.
Yeah, so I'm Lee Carter. I'm a member of the Virginia House of Delegates. I represent the 50th District, which is the city of Manassas and parts of western Prince William County. And I am running for governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. So in Virginia, we love elections so much that we have them every year. We have our state elections in odd numbered years. So I am running for governor right now in the 2021 elections. I'm actually currently in the middle of a legislative session and I have a statewide primary in June. Wow. So, it's fun.
You're always running.
Yeah, always running something.
Oh my God!
So how many people can't stand this country?
Our local elections and our federal elections are in even numbered years, just like everybody else, and then odd numbered years, it's just us in New Jersey, which is always a ton of fun.
He's from Jersey.
I'm from Jersey.
Oh, so you get it? You've been there. The yard signs never go away.
No, it definitely does not. And obviously, you are a self-proclaimed democratic socialist.
Socialist. I don't use the term democratic socialist.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't use the term democratic socialist for the same reason I don't say ATM machine or au jus sauce. It's redundant, right? So socialism is an umbrella term for any economic system where the people who do the work every day are the people who are making the decisions democratically amongst themselves and have ownership over the place where they work in a one person, one vote basis. And so, by when people call themselves democratic socialists, it's like, oh, no, I'm not that kind of socialist.
Well, that's one of the reasons I hate that whole thing, because I feel like, first of all, none of the people that are saying they're democratic socialists are. What they are social democrats. They're not socialists at all. They're capitalists. So when they say that, I think that we're just creating another generation of people that won't know what things are. We're not, and just falsely using labels. And I just think it's unproductive. But yeah, socialism means workers own the means of production. And when people would say Bernie's a socialist, I'm like, yeah, no, he's not.
Well, I mean, he has had a number of alternative ownership bills in the past, so he has done things to promote actual socialist ownership of enterprise. There's a reason that worker cooperatives have the highest density in Vermont of any state in the union, and it's because of the political influence of Bernie Sanders, right? So I think it's a little bit unfair to Bernie to say that he's a social democrat and not a socialist. Although his presidential campaigns didn't highlight that.
No, I mean, and he always talks about Scandinavia and Sweden and Norway and those countries, and those are social democracies.
Right.
So when he promotes that, that's what I'm thinking is the system he's promoting.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about what his presidential campaigns highlighted.
Yeah.
Not definitionally being socialism. I think it's important to separate the two things out, right? Because you have the question of how much government should do. On the that's the scale of social democracy to laissez-faire, right? And then you have an entirely separate scale of who should own the businesses. Should it be billionaires and investors, and that's capitalism, or should it be the people who do the work for a living? And that's socialism, right? So they're two entirely separate categories, and it really drives me nuts when people conflate the two, because you have people saying, oh, socialism is when the government owns everything, and that's just completely false.
Yeah, they don't understand at all what that means, and that's the problem. So we like to be educational, but what is the population, your demographic, like, and what is your campaign like? What are you really wanting to see for your state? Like, what are you working on?
Yeah, so Virginia has about 8.5 million people, and we have very high military density, very high veteran density. We're home to Norfolk Naval Base. We're home to the Pentagon. We're home to, any number of facilities in between. But Virginia kind of economically, it kind of looks like America in miniature. And so, we've got, although we do have a high percentage of people that work for the federal government or for federal contractors, the private sector of Virginia's economy is very, we have a little bit of manufacturing. We have a whole lot of agriculture. We have, a whole lot of the service economy. And so, you've got the problems in Virginia that exist in the country as a whole. We're the most economically unequal state in the union. We have the wealthiest county in America, which is Loudoun County. And we also have some places down in Southwest Virginia where, the wealthiest person might have $40,000 to their name. Right. And so, there's, in Virginia's history, there's been this sort of weird pattern where the politicians ascribe to what they call the Virginia way, which is this bipartisan, pro-corporate, very, very, very pro-corporate, nothing will ever change type political philosophy. And then throughout Virginia's history, you see, every 50 years or so, there's this massive spike of populist energy. With the readjuster movement after the Civil War, you had in the 1960s, there was a guy named Henry Howell, who was lieutenant governor for 2 years and ran for governor 3 times and got 49%. He was this close, on a platform of civil rights and union rights and consumer advocacy. Right. So, Virginia's political scene is one where the system kind of stagnates for a while, and then you have the conditions for an outsider to come in and really shake things up. And I think that right now is one of those times for an outsider to come and shake things up. And I think I'm that person to do it. And so, I'm running for governor. I'm in a 5-way primary. I'm the only Democratic candidate who's never taken a dime from fossil fuel corporations. I'm the only Democratic candidate who's never taken a dime from big banks.
Do you have primaries?
We have open primary. And it looks like the Republicans are not going to have a primary at all. They're going to have a convention. So, it'll be open for anybody, regardless of party, to come in and vote. But, I've never taken a dime from any for-profit corporation or industry interest group in my entire time in politics. I never have, and I never will. And that's why I'm able to come in and talk about the actual structure of our political system and the structure of our economy, and say that when we rebuild after COVID, we need to do it in a way that we own, that we operate. That way the next crisis doesn't come and topple the whole house of cards again.
Lee, can you talk about how Virginia is a state that has transformed dramatically in the last probably 15 to 20 years? It was obviously solid red up until Obama. It became sort of a swing state, but now it seems to be firmly blue. But a lot of that blue obviously is heavily concentrated in Northern Virginia. I'm fairly familiar with the area, been through there many times. Can you discuss more or less what the overall Democratic vote looks like in the state? Because it seems to me that when we think about the so-called neoliberal centrist, almost like utopia, if you will, it is places like Loudoun and Fairfax and places like that, which is in many ways significantly different from places obviously like Southwest Virginia, Richmond, Charlottesville.
That's worker
like
people, right?
Yes.
So it's populists. That's wherever the worker bees are. So yeah, I'm not familiar with Virginia.
But in terms of like the changing, if you will, because Virginia is not what I would call a progressive state. It's blue, but it's definitely a lot of what goes on in terms of the voting, it seems, is determined in that, DC metro northern suburban area. Would you say that that's accurate?
Yeah, I think, the Democratic Party of Virginia has been courting that suburban, more affluent vote for quite a while. But, my district is in Northern Virginia, right? My district is essentially the border between what we call Nova, Northern Virginia, and Rova, the rest of Virginia.
There you go.
If you're on the western edge of my district looking east, everything in front of you is houses all the way to Boston. Everything behind you is cows all the way to California. So, there is that divide. And, the Democratic Party has taken a lot of votes for granted, particularly in communities of color. And the Republican Party has taken a lot of votes for granted in rural communities. And, I'm going out there and saying that, the division in this Commonwealth is not between red and blue. It's between the people who have power and influence versus the people who have bills to pay. And I'm hoping that we can get people who have checked out of the political process, who have not voted in primaries for a very long time, if ever, to start showing up and say, you know what, we want to kick the apple cart over. We want someone who's actually going to fight for us and not just take our votes for granted anymore.
I think so. Wait, I just want to say, so because you have open primaries, that is an extraordinary opportunity to get the people that are the populist right, that are the people that are, the labor on the right. And that is something that we cannot do here. And it's very frustrating because the working people have infinitely more in common, whether they're blue or red, than anything else. And so to be able to tap into that is real. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't even necessarily call them the populist right, but just, people that live in rural areas who never.
Just regular people. I just mean people that just are regular people, working people, people that is the general. I just mean in a sense of want what regular people want.
Yeah. And, when you're talking about rural areas, I think there's a tendency to think of them like the Republican Party's elected officials.
Yeah.
And I think that's incorrect. It's people that live in small towns and they're just trying to keep a roof over their head and they're trying to, make sure that their kids' school isn't falling apart. And they're seeing hospitals close all around them. They're seeing their economy washed out from under their feet. And I think even especially rural communities of color are just ignored by everyone in Virginia politics, if not national politics. I mean, that's the kind of place that I grew up. I'm from a small town in North Carolina that is a majority black town that's the county seat of a majority white county with a population of 20,000. Right. And so, it's the sort of place where it has the issues of systemic racism keeping the communities of color down. And it also has the issues of our economy completely failing in rural America. It has both, and neither political party is addressing both sides of that.
We're speaking with Lee Carter, who is a current State House representative in the Commonwealth of Virginia and is running to be the next governor of Virginia. I think it's a good opportunity to distinguish yourself, not just from your current candidates, but from your current governor, who's also a Democrat, Governor Northam. So if you could talk about what are the things that he has done that you do think need improvement upon and you will do differently than he has done over the past several years.
Well, the single biggest thing is economic development, right? This is where the bipartisan consensus in Virginia is on economic development. And, the current economic development programs were started by former Governor McAuliffe, who was one of my opponents in this primary. And Governor Northam has continued them. But what they mean by economic development is just taking tens and hundreds of millions of dollars and using that money to try to bribe massive corporations to come in from out of state. And please, pretty please, will you give us some jobs? And they keep, cramming these corporate headquarters like Amazon HQ2 and Nestle and IKEA and Volvo, and they cram them into the same handful of localities over and over and over again. And, that causes people to come in from out of state. It drives up housing prices. And, on paper, it looks like the economic conditions for the people in those localities is improving. But in reality, it's just replacing the people in those localities with newer, richer people from out of state. And then the folks who, grew up in Arlington, they got to move out to Fairfax because they can't afford Arlington anymore. And then 5 years later, they got to move out here to Manassas because they can't afford Fairfax anymore. And then eventually they live in Fauquier and Stafford, and they're still working in DC and driving an hour and a half each day. And that's if there's no traffic, which there never is. Right. So instead of continuing down that path of cramming more and more out-of-state corporations into these small handful of places, instead of begging billionaires to come in and pretty please give us some jobs, we're going to take that money and we're going to put it into the hands of working Virginians. And we're going to say, this is your startup capital. This is the money that you're going to need to create your own employee-owned enterprise. You own it. You control it. When the next crisis hits, it's not going to be a case where, 8 executives in a boardroom in New York are deciding whether or not you get to eat. It's going to be you making the decision of what to do with the money. You get to look out for the bottom line, and you're not going to vote to lay yourself off. So, not only do we solve a lot of the problems of our current economic development system, but we also, by rebuilding in a way that's worker owned, we create resiliency against the next crisis. Because, these crises, the problem always comes when these companies say, we need to look out for the bottom line. And that means firing 40,000 people. But, if it's the 40,000 people who would be fired that are making the decision of how to cut expenses, their own families are not going to be the expense that they cut.
No, I mean, ultimately what we're talking about, these are companies that are more concerned with their shareholders than with their employees. And so ultimately that's going to benefit everybody that's not in the state of Virginia, just as much as it's going to benefit a handful of people that may get employed that are in the state of Virginia. So it's really, there's a lot of money that's leaving your state and not benefiting your state. So it's unnecessary.
Right. Yeah. And, there are examples right now of what that looks like in the real world, right? On the small scale, it could be a diner with a dozen people that live there. And every 2 weeks, after they clean the tables off, they lock the door, they bring out the balance sheet and the schedule, and they decide amongst themselves who works what hours and what they do with the money. On the large scale, the largest worker cooperative in the world is the Mondragon Corporation. It was founded in Spain in the 1950s with a dozen people in a church basement. They now have, I think, 87,000 employee owners. They work in 90 some odd different countries, and they've never had a layoff. Through all the economic crises that we've been through in the last 65 or 70 years, they've never had a round of layoffs because their CEO has to run for re-election among the workers, right? And if you're hacking and slashing and firing to keep the bottom line intact, you're not going to get reelected. So instead they tighten the belts, right? The cuts come from the top. The executives take a pay cut to keep other people on the payroll. And that's the sort of economy that we can have. We just need to have the political will to say, we are going to own our economy. Far off investors are not going to own this thing that controls our destiny anymore. It's going to be us.
So then what happens to unions?
So this is an interesting question. I am very, very pro-labor. I think that everybody.
I know. Well, as are we, but we're not always pro-union. Pro-union and pro-labor are often two different things, unfortunately.
Yeah. unions, I think that everyone who works in an investor-owned workplace should have a union, absolutely, because that's your way of having some control over the decisions that are made. But it's really kind of veto control. It's not direct control. It's I think you've gone too far this time, so we're going to shut everything down until you reel it back in. Whereas when we talk about actual employee ownership, that's the employees or the representatives of the employees making the decisions from day to day. And, one way that you can frame that is essentially the union owns the shop, right? So you're not talking about like open shop versus closed shop. This is the union of all the workers, are the ones who actually hold the title. Right. They're the ones who control what goes in and what comes out. And so, it's a completely different dynamic from what people are used to thinking of when they think of a union, because, people are used to, the most power you can have is just that veto. But instead of having a veto over someone else's decision, I'd much rather have the working people of Virginia be the ones making that decision.
Yeah.
Lee, we've got a couple of rapid fire questions in the meantime. If you could, we sent you a private message. If you can retweet the live link, we want to get as many people watching as possible right now. Again, we're talking with Lee Carter, who is currently a state house representative in the Commonwealth of Virginia. He is running to be the next governor of the state of Virginia. CarterForVirginia.com. Please check it out. Learn more about him.
He doesn't take any corporate money. People, this is the key thing.
That is the issue.
It is. It's really, without that, there's really no point in discussing any other policy issues. So,
1000%.
Right. So Lee is the only Democrat running in his primary that has not taken fossil fuel money. Right? It was fossil fuel money in particular, but
fossil fuel money, big bank money,
right? Any of it.
Yeah.
Well, it really does make all the difference in the world when you think about it. Everyone the one thing I've learned, and I've been in sales for over 15 years, is that the simpler you can keep it for people, because as I'm sure you've been in Virginian for a very long time, you remember how popular George W. Bush was in the state. And I think it goes without saying.
North Carolina at the time, but
even there too. Yeah, there you go. And one of the reasons he was so popular is because he was so simple. And that was also one of the appeals of Trump for a lot of people. And I do think
Trump is simple.
That is for sure. And so I really think it's important for people to understand how there really needs to be this very clear distinction between everyone gets bogged down in the wedge issues.
Yes.
To me, this is corporate versus non-corporate. And as we just saw with what happened with GameStop, it seems pretty clear to me that the ideas of, let's say, ranked choice voting, worker co-ops, really the workers taking control of the means of production, which is essentially the essence of socialism, would you say that is the primary issue that you're fighting for when it comes to workers' rights? I really do think that everything that's happening right now, it's kind of like an avalanche that's just waiting to tumble down.
We need yellow vests.
It kind of feels that way.
We need yellow vests. I wish they came with our cars.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get bogged down by the labels, right? They get scared off by the S word. And so, I tend not to lead with, hi, I'm a socialist and I want to be the next governor, right? What I talk about is the effects of that, which is, under Governor Carter, we're not going to be giving these handouts to massive corporations anymore. That money is going to go to you so that you can build the economy for yourself. Under a Governor Carter, we're going to make sure that your COVID expenses are reimbursed, because I don't think you should be out of pocket because you got sick during a pandemic, right? Whether that's $20 for a test or $200,000 for an ICU stay, I'm going to create an office that will handle the reimbursement of COVID expenses. So you bring in the receipts for what you paid and you get a check from the Commonwealth so that you're made whole, right? I think that we should legalize cannabis. And when we do it, there's currently a bill to legalize
Why
cannabis.
he does this to me?
Because you're one of the biggest cannabis advocates I've ever known.
Okay, I'm a pothead. That's basically what he's saying to you.
That's
whatever.
Pot advocate.
Pot advocate.
Yeah, I've put in cannabis legalization bills for the last couple of years, and the first time I did it, it was like, oh my God, what are you doing? I had other Democrats other Democrats that I'm currently running against that came up to me and said, why are you doing this to me in an election year?
To them?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, by putting that bill out there, we were able to organize people and we were able to get this fight going. And now our current governor is on board with legalization. It looks like legalization is going to happen. And the conversation is now, what do we do to legalize, right? It's no longer do we legalize or not. It's how do we legalize?
You have to have home grow. To have home grow.
Yeah, and under a Carter administration, we're going to not only have anti-monopoly provisions so that big tobacco can't buy up the whole industry. We're going to have home grow, and we're going to make sure the industry is owned and operated by the people who work in it, which is mostly going to be the people who have been affected by the war on drugs. And we're going to make sure that every single penny of cannabis tax revenue goes toward reparations for Black and Indigenous Virginians. Because
I love you.
Virginia's government has been complicit in some of the worst crimes ever committed in the genocide of Native Americans, the transatlantic slave trade, redlining, Jim Crow, the war on drugs, all of these things that our government has to try to make amends for. Cannabis tax alone is not going to be enough to completely make up for it, but we got to start.
Yeah, no, that's a great connection.
And it's a great place to start. And the biggest promise that I'm making is, we're going to end the mass incarceration system in this Commonwealth. The United States incarcerates more of its people than any other country in history. And second place isn't even close. So, I'm going to fight to change the laws so that we're not locking so many people up. But as governor, even if it takes me signing thousands of commutations myself, I will guarantee that after my 4 years are up, our prison population will be at least 30% lower than the day I'm sworn in. And that's a power that the governor has unilaterally. Yes. So that is a promise I can make. If I make it to the governor's mansion, our prison population will go down, period. Yeah.
Nonviolent drug offenders. Yeah. I mean, well, look, there's a myriad of reasons why that we have over incarceration, but clearly nonviolent drug offenders is a huge part of that population.
We have a very important question. It is an open primary race, but is it a runoff race? Is it basically the top two go to the general, or is this the election?
Yeah, explain your primary process.
It is a conventional open primary. So, the Republican Party is going to have a convention, it looks like, to pick their party appointed nominee. And the Democratic Party is having a state-run primary. So everyone can vote in the Democratic primary. It is open. And out of the five of us that are running for the Democratic nomination, whoever gets the most votes will be the Democratic nominee.
Okay.
We'll take on the Republican nominee.
Yeah.
We're speaking with Lee Carter, who is running for the governorship in the Commonwealth of Virginia, currently a state house representative. Everybody who's watching, please make sure to subscribe on YouTube, hit the like button, and share. Want as many people to know about Lee as possible.
This is a really nice comment. And so I did a little research into you. So I know that you're a Marine. So, and I'm a very, I wouldn't say I'm a pacifist, but I'm just a non-military person, and people know that. But yet, and I will say it's very interesting. There's this dichotomy. I have the utmost respect for people that dedicate their lives to something greater than themselves. So I have a lot of respect for that. And I definitely have a very soft spot for Marines. This goes back to somebody my freshman year in college who was an ROTC, but needless to say, I digress. So I find that very cool. And someone had just said you inspired them to serve and then run for office. I think that's really awesome. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, a lot of leftists get hung up on the fact that I'm a veteran, but I grew up in a military family in a military town. I was told essentially from the cradle that this is a way that you can, first of all, get on your feet, and second, do something good while you're doing it. And unfortunately, it turned out that second part turned out not to be true. And there's this class divide within the military that a lot of people don't recognize, don't want to recognize, where you have officers that come from wealthy backgrounds, that come from wealthy communities, They have a college degree as a requirement, and they are allowed to quit at any time. And then you have enlisted, who are largely much poorer, who come from a small handful of places in this country, from military towns, from the Rust Belt, from places that are either stagnant or in decline. And we're not allowed to quit at any time, right? So you come in and you're sold on this idea of doing something good, and it's going to be amazing, and you're going to feel great about everything, and it's going to be a way that you can put a roof over your family's head, and blah 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 blah. And at 18 years old, you sign your name on that line, and then in my case, for the next 5 years, because I had a 5-year contract, if I had tried to quit, they would have thrown me in jail, right? And
it's a pretty hardcore jobs program that we offer in this country, but make no mistake, that is our job. That is our jobs program.
Yeah. And it's that dichotomy that leaves a lot of people coming out of the military extremely disillusioned. If you actually go and talk to people on military bases, particularly junior enlisted troops, the number one thing that you will hear is, my recruiter lied to me. That is the most common sentiment on a military base. And, you get on the right, you get this troop worship that's like, rah, rah, absolutely everybody in the military is a hero and none of them have done anything wrong. And then on the left, you get this, the exact polar opposite of anybody who's ever been in the military is just completely evil. And it leaves
people who think that.
Yep.
It leaves the overwhelming majority of people who do one tour of enlistment and get out because they're disillusioned, because the reality didn't match up to the propaganda that they were sold on. And, it's like most of us, we just want to go back to normal life. We actually do want to help people, as opposed to, the what our recruiter said we were going to do, So it's just I think the folks on both sides of this issue have got the military just completely wrong in completely different ways.
Yeah.
Well, that's why there's a difference. Somebody put up anti-war is not anti-veteran. And that is the distinction that I think really needs to be put out there. Obviously, one of the things that I do think is the advantage to the non-corporate progressive candidates in multi-person races is you pretty much have that lane all to yourself. What is your path to victory against the rest of the field? What do you see as being that path?
He's just better.
That's the easy answer.
So I'm running against a former governor who is a very close friend of the Clinton family.
Say no more.
The guy has a 9-figure bank account.
Just that's what we need.
I am absolutely never going to raise more money than him, so I'm not going to try.
There's no. It's
right.
Never
so the strategy is to just not try to make it an arms race. It's to just get the message out to people who have been taken for granted or completely forgotten by the major political parties. And we're going to create this sort of farmer labor strategy where we're talking to folks in rural areas and saying, we're going to put you back to work in jobs that you own. We're gonna fight back against Walmart and Family Dollar, because everybody who lives in a small town knows when Walmart and Family Dollar come in, all the mom and pops board up and everybody's screwed. Right? We're going to fight back against them. We are going to bring back the main street shops, and we're going to do it in a way that people in your community own. We're also going to bring back family farms by creating programs to feed hungry Virginians with Virginia-grown, cooperatively owned produce.
It's fascinating. Yes, I know. It's just, it boggles the mind how, it's just
common sense.
It is, but yet it's so frustrating that this is like such an effort,
And then we're going to go into the cities and into the suburbs, and we're going to say, we're going to fight to make sure that the housing prices go down, because like where I live in Manassas, I have a very small apartment that I'm paying $2,000 a month for. and this is the cheapest place in town.
Yeah.
So, people are just getting absolutely squeezed out by real estate speculators that are profiting off of the massive influx of people that come in every time there's one of these economic development programs. And so we're going to fight back against the big corporate landlords. We're going to fight for things like statewide rent control, cooperative ownership of multifamily units. We're going to fight for like a vacancy tax for unoccupied rental properties, so they can't just sit on these empty apartments and empty houses to drive the price up, and good cause eviction laws, so that you can't be kicked out of your home when you didn't do anything wrong, right? We're going to fight for all of these things that put you in control of your housing. That way, we will be able to lower the cost of housing and let you, the working Virginian in Fairfax or Alexandria or Arlington or Henrico or wherever, we're going to let you not have to work so many hours to keep a roof over your head so you can see your kids. So, it's both of those things. And by giving folks in every part of Virginia a better future to look forward to, we're going to get people out to vote who have never voted in a Democratic primary before. And we are absolutely going to win this thing.
When is your primary?
It's June 8th. But early voting starts 45 days before that. So, particularly in COVID conditions, I'm encouraging people to register for absentee ballots so you can vote by mail.
Yes.
But that does, it pushes it way ahead. So I think that starts, let me look at a calendar here. Let's see, June. Yeah, it starts somewhere around the end of April. So we really don't have a lot of time.
Yeah. So, and I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm thinking, okay, like if you win, I'm thinking that the solution for us in Florida is for the progressives to pack up and move to Virginia. Because it's sounding really good there. And yeah.
Well, ironically, Jen has a very strong affinity for your home state of North Carolina.
Yes, I am. Yeah, I am definitely. I'm a mountain girl stuck in a beach town. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Florida's definitely it moves very, very slowly.
Slow.
And we've got all kinds of problems. We've got the COVID vaccine that's been monopolized by Publix because of their relationship with the governor. It's bad.
I got family in Florida.
So
my mom went to high school in Jacksonville. So
okay.
Yeah, I'm very, very familiar.
You're familiar with Florida?
I know that Florida is the only place where the more north you go, the more south you get.
That's true.
Florida is, and one of the things they teach you when you're studying for the bar exam here is Florida was at the time, and it probably still is, it's the only state where a man can legally marry his mother. Yeah.
Well,
Florida is full of it. Look, that's one of the first things they teach you in Barbary. It's like an icebreaker, and it should something. Look, everybody who's taken Florida Barbary, that's what we remember is from the family law section.
We call the most conservative part of the state, the Panhandle, Floribama, for a reason. It definitely has earned its reputation, and of course, it has Matt Gaetz as a representative. Well, so there's,
I grew up in a military family, right? My dad was Coast Guard. I started elementary school in Mobile. So,
there you go.
So, I'm very, very familiar with the Gulf states as a whole.
It's special.
It's its own thing for sure.
But so is Virginia. But so is Virginia. You really, again, I know you said it's Northern Virginia and rest of Virginia, but if you think about it, it really is a very unique state. It's got a lot of rich history, to say the least. And of course, you got Northern, you got Southwest, you've got
I need to spend more time there. I do.
And also the East Coast. I mean, Virginia Beach, Newport News, there's just so much that the state has to offer that there really is this misconception about what Virginia is all about. I do agree with you that Northern Virginia is its own state in many ways, but so much of the rest of the state has so much to offer, and it's so beautiful. It's so nature rich, and especially because, when I've driven through the state, I usually come up to the Southwest corridor off of, I forgot what that interstate is that crosses through. Yeah, the one that crosses to 84, I think it is. Am I the one that crosses through Tennessee and and North Carolina. But anyway, I'm coming through the area that. Say that again.
Maybe 77.
Yeah, I think whatever one that comes through. What am I thinking of? The city that's in the southwest part of Virginia. That's the name is losing me right now. But my point is, when you're driving through that part of the state, it's like mom and pop shops as far as the eye can see. Everybody has their own like acre of land, and it's like Americana to the fullest extent. And it's like that for about 2 to 3 hours of straight driving until you literally hit a part of the state where you're in a completely different world, where, like you said, Manassas and McLean and Alexandria and places like that. I can't for the life of me understand how they think it's okay to just forget about that part of the state. And the more it becomes blue, because of the corporate blue that it is, the more I fear that those voters are being forgotten. And I'm thinking that for you specifically, that could be the path to victory, is really focusing on that rural working class voter.
Well, those are the places, the mountains of Virginia are, some of my favorite places in the world. And I'm not just saying that because I need votes out there.
Yeah.
It really, just always from the first moment that I went out there, me and my dad took a vacation to Sparta, North Carolina, which is about this far outside of Galax. And just that part of the world is just the most gorgeous place that I've ever been. And I have been a lot of places. But yeah, it's just completely forgotten by the Democratic Party. And, there's a lot of Democrats that just write that area off because they vote for Republicans for president. But, you look at the political history of Southwest Virginia, and, it's the place that's had historically the highest union density. There's a very rich sort of ancestral history out there of militant unionism, because they grew up hearing stories about granddaddy grabbing his rifle and going to defend the picket line at the coal mine, right? So there is definitely a rich opportunity for someone to come along and say, we're going to put working people in charge again in Southwest Virginia. And we're gonna get away from the politics of racism and letting big corporations exploit racism to manipulate people into voting for corporate politicians. And we're gonna build a multiracial working class coalition in Southwest Virginia and in Hampton Roads and in Richmond and everywhere. And every single place in this Commonwealth, we are gonna put working Virginians in charge.
And I finally remembered. And a friend of Jen's actually pointed out it's Interstate 81 and it's Roanoke. That's what I couldn't remember.
Thank you, Rosebud.
I do think that
we actually just got rail service back to Roanoke like a year and a half ago for the first time in like 50 years. So,
which is a good thing. And I got to tell you,
this is what happens when you have very smart friends who federal law clerk friends who are just really, really smart and very wonky, and they just look stuff up for you just because they're there.
Well, that's a good advantage. And what that leads me to is we actually have a number of friends. We had an amazing volunteer, Bella, on the campaign, who is at George Mason. There are so many big colleges throughout the state. Have you been able to make some good inroads with those people? And that's a good segue to a question of, you happen to have a supporter in the state who graduated last year and is curious about your opinion on the curriculum taught in Virginia schools and how that may change. So essentially a two-parter, which is the Virginia education system coupled with your ability to connect with a lot of the college students throughout the state, and there are plenty.
There are plenty. And our education curriculum definitely does need some change. One of the things that I'm going to do as governor is I'm going to treat teachers like the knowledgeable professionals that they are. I'm going to trust their judgment, right? I know that doesn't sound like a big political statement.
No, it does, which is it's pathetic, but it does. And continue. I'm sorry.
So, there's a federal minimum number of standardized tests that every state has to administer. but Virginia currently exceeds that minimum. So we're going to come down to the minimum. We are not going to do any standardized tests that the federal government doesn't absolutely require. And we're going to put teachers in charge of what they teach so that we're not teaching to a standardized test. This is the thing that we hear all the time from teachers in the Commonwealth is, I feel like there's no flexibility. There's no room to teach important things. We have these moments where, if I had the time, I could go off on a tangent and the kids are, involved and they're really focused in on what, side discussion we could have. But instead of that, I have to, snap them back and say, you need to memorize the answer to question 52. Right. And so we're not going to do that anymore. Teachers are going to have that flexibility to teach students in a way that makes them well-rounded people. In Virginia's Constitution, we actually have some language that needs to change when it comes to education. Virginia's Constitution says that the Commonwealth shall seek to provide an equal education in every locality, but that seek to right there.
Not shall provide, not shall provide.
Right. So I will support a constitutional amendment to get rid of the words seek to in the educational portion of Virginia's Constitution, so that Virginia's Constitution will say the Commonwealth will provide an equal education in every locality. Because we have some localities where, like Loudoun County, you have these fantastically well-funded schools because it's the wealthiest county in America. And people are clamoring to get into those schools. But then you go to places like Richmond County or Lee County or Westmoreland County, where there's just no property tax base to support good schools. And it's this death spiral, right? So the property tax base is low, so they can't put the money they need to into schools. Because they can't put the money they need to into schools, people don't want to live there. Because people don't want to live there, the property tax goes down. Because the property tax is going down, they have to cut more from schools over and over and over again. And the buildings are crumbling. And it's not just rural Virginia. I mean, it happens in the cities too, right? We have this problem in Richmond County with a population of a few hundred. And we have this problem in Richmond City with a population of a few 100,000. So we've got to get rid of that educational disparity, and we're going to do that by changing those two words in Virginia's Constitution.
It's amazing.
Virginia is one of the biggest states in the country, much like the Carolinas, for military families. Are you the only current former soldier that is?
Okay, he's not a soldier; he's a Marine.
I said former soldier.
You said soldier.
Sorry. You're not allowed to say.
It's a Marine. And I would like to point out the person who taught me that. Thank you. Same person right there. That's Rosemary Coakley, because her husband, Thad, is a Marine. And I learned that. And you should know that. I'm sorry.
The Marines are on another level than the rest. I understand that. And listen, I didn't join the Army. I
clearly
did, but I know that there's a certain level of respect and honor that comes with being Semper Fi. So with that said, are you the only current person who has served in the military that is running for governor?
Yeah, definitely on the Democratic side. There's more people jumping into the race on the Republican side, but frankly, there's only two Republican candidates that have a chance in a convention, and neither one of them are veterans. So, if I'm the Democratic, I am the only one in the Democratic race who's a veteran.
Right.
And if I'm the nominee, then I'll be the only one in the race in November who's a veteran.
Well, I definitely think that is something that all Marines are former Marines.
Thank you, Rosebud.
Not ex-Marines. Ex-Marines are kicked out.
This is what I'm saying. And you're not a soldier.
Did I say ex?
No, you said soldier. Soldier is not a Marine. Yeah. Sorry. Onward.
But even looking at the rest of the General Assembly, right? There's 100 delegates. There's 40 senators. I want to say there's 2 of us that were enlisted. There's about a dozen former officers from various branches, Air Force, Navy.
Wow.
But there's I think 2 enlisted guys. I'm the only Democrat that was enlisted.
Right.
And that perspective, just enlisted versus officer, is a massive change in perspective. A large part of the Democratic Party's problem connecting with military voters is they keep trying to run these rich college boy officers over and over and over.
Don't even. I know what it disgusts me.
Lee, do you know the last elected Democratic president who served in the military?
No, I don't.
JFK. JFK is the last one,
and he was an officer. He
sure was. He was a war hero,
but he was an officer,
right?
And
yeah, of course.
I guess the
Democratic Party. The Democratic Party puts up officers and says this will get us the military vote, and then they wonder why they struggle in military towns. It's because officers are speaking a completely different language from enlisted. I mean, first of all, just the usage of the word fuck. It's on a completely different level between enlisted and officers. But we have different life experiences. We come from different backgrounds than officers do. And former officers, yes, we can honor the service they put in, but it is a completely different type of person. And they just don't have that connection with enlisted folks.
Yeah,
I definitely think that is something, I just as an observer from the outside, that especially in a state like Virginia, I would lean into that. I do think that there is something about being a person of honor that goes a very long way. And especially on, like you said, the Democratic side.
I think it's just women like men in uniforms.
That helps too. that definitely can hurt.
No, it's true.
The
and that doesn't really apply. I'm sorry, but it doesn't really apply to law enforcement officers for me. But to each his own. For me,
that's a different thing.
It's Marine whites and anything kind of firefighter that looks like official, like when they're dressed, not in the firefighter during the firefighting, but you know what I'm saying. But yeah, it's Marine whites and dressed up firefighters or something special.
So a couple of so we'll go with as we wind down, a couple of rapid fires. I want to get back to some of the questions that have come in we've had a great audience that have come in this evening, and your boost definitely helped it out a significant amount. So we thank you for that. Ranked choice voting, yes or no?
We don't have it, but we should.
Okay, that's what they wanted to know, if you were in favor of it.
Yeah,
I would imagine.
I would imagine so. And why would somebody ask you that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very clear from the first month of my first campaign for the House that I run as a Democrat because there's no Labor Party.
Same here.
And the fact of the matter is that our ballot system is what forces people into choosing only two options. Right? If you structure the ballot differently, then people can actually vote for who they want, as opposed to voting for who they think is least likely to lose.
Oh, yeah.
I tell everybody, if you really think it doesn't make a difference, look no further than what happened in the general when Howie Hawkins got less than 1% of the vote, and Lisa Savage up in Maine, because of ranked choice voting, got over 5% of the vote. Now everyone's like, well, 5%. Well, if we had ranked choice voting, then over time, it naturally would become a much more accepted thing where you could vote for the candidate you want. And I think that makes all the difference in the world. With that said,
how it builds up over time.
And for sure. And how do you feel about the People's Party? Is it something that has any type of, footing in Virginia that people are talking about? Obviously here in Florida, we are close primary, gerrymandered to the hilt, all that. It's not going to happen. It's Democrat or Republican. That's
and it's
the way
Florida.
It is. And it's Florida. How about Virginia? How is the reception been for the possibility of looking to an outside option versus the traditional two parties?
Yeah, well, I run as a Democrat. I'm running as a Democrat for governor. I've run as a Democrat for the House twice now, because that's what's feasible here.
Yeah.
I like to say that there's no other country in the world where me and Terry McAuliffe would be in the same party. And that's just a fact. I mean, we represent completely different constituencies. I represent a working class constituency, a labor constituency, a constituency of renters, of people that are struggling to afford health care. I represent a constituency of people who don't have this massive, overwhelming faith in institutions and have to look to their neighbors for help making ends meet or for help keeping their communities safe. And former Governor McAuliffe does not represent those folks. He represents lobbyists, and he represents landlords, and he represents massive corporations. And it shows, because if you go on vpap.org and look at who his donors are, they are completely different from mine. They are massive corporations. They are billionaires. They are hedge funds. They are fossil fuel companies and big banks. And my donors are school bus drivers and programmers and teachers. And we represent two entirely different populations. Yeah. And in any country with a rational electoral system, we would not be in the same party.
Well, we're not rational. We have a completely malfunctioning republic. We have a non-functioning republic. It's just completely not functioning.
The only thing that unifies me and the corporate wing of the Democratic Party is opposition to Republicans.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. That's a low bar, as they say.
It's a very low bar.
So the bar is on the floor.
Yeah.
We're obviously in desperate need of, radical change at this point. We have already seen in the first week of the Biden administration that it's probably not going to happen unless people get in the streets. I would be shocked if it took, if it didn't happen that way. What type of a difference would it make at the state level? Because obviously at the federal level, we would need to have Medicare for all implemented that way. But is there anything that could be done at the state level? Because we're actually going to be having a group called Whole Washington on our show very soon, which is going to talk about the push for statewide Medicare for all in Washington State.
I just did an interview today with a legislator from Florida, and one of our questions is about Medicaid expansion. So that's a big thing that the league is pushing on, is Medicaid expansion. And, even that, we won't get that, but
what could be done? Yeah. What could be done as governor from your perspective, as far as healthcare is concerned at the state level?
Well, my first campaign, I ran against a member of Republican Party leadership. Like this was the number 3 guy among the House Republicans when the Republicans were one vote away from being able to overturn a veto. I mean, they were literally one seat away from a supermajority. This is an extraordinarily powerful guy who had been holding up Medicaid expansion for 8-9 years at that point. I came in along with a bunch of others in the 2017 elections. And although we didn't get the majority in that election, we scared the piss out of the Republicans. And we forced them to go ahead and go along with Medicaid expansion. They didn't want to, but we forced their hand. And we were able to get, there's now about 500,000 Virginians who have health insurance thanks to Medicaid expansion that did not have it before. But there's still about 500,000 Virginians with no health insurance whatsoever. And that was before the pandemic. And there's upwards of 1 million Virginians who have health insurance and they can't afford to use it. And so, a lot of Democrats here in Virginia, once we passed Medicaid expansion, they said, that's it, we're done with healthcare. What's the next thing? And I've constantly been saying, no, we are not done with healthcare. We've done the bare minimum. We've got to keep going. And so last year, I introduced and passed into law HB 66, which caps copays for insulin products at $50 a month. This year, I put in 2 budget amendments to build on that success. One to allow for pharmacies to dispense an emergency supply of insulin if if your prescription is expired or you broke the vial and you need a refill and you don't have a valid prescription, you can't get to the doctor for a week. It'll allow pharmacies to issue a prescription for an emergency basis to tide you over until you can get the real prescription. And another budget amendment that will allow Virginia Medicaid to cover insulin products for all uninsured Virginians. And that's the big one. If we get that one, and the price tag on that is a lot lower than I thought. But if we get that one, then Virginia will be the first state where we can actually say that every Virginian with diabetes can get the insulin that they need, period. End of story. No other state can say that. We will be the first.
It's amazing. Florida doesn't aspire for anything. Yeah. Nobody aspires for anything. We're perfectly content being 46th in education and 48th in mental health availability and services. And we're just content with that.
But while I'm doing these incremental steps, I'm also fighting for the big picture. which is a universal healthcare system that covers everybody so that everybody can see a doctor. We're not talking about access. We are talking about healthcare. Period. I want it to work for the average Virginian the way that it works for active duty military, which is when you need to see a doctor, you go to medical, you show them your ID card, and they fix you up. And that's it. And there's absolutely no reason why Virginia can't have that. The example that I look to is Austria, because it's the closest analog to Virginia when you're comparing economies, right? We have 8.5 million people. They have 8.3 million. Their GDP is like 5% different from ours. Their land mass is like, 20% different from ours. So it's a very, very close comparison. And they have a universal healthcare system and we don't. And their universal healthcare system is one of the most expensive in the world. And it's still 30% cheaper than ours that doesn't cover everybody. So there's absolutely no reason. I mean, we have the example. Even if we just copy and paste from Austria, we're going to save 30% and we're going to cover everybody. We're going to save lives. And, if obviously the Fed's doing it would be best. I want Medicare for all on the federal level. They're the currency issuing authority. They don't have a balanced budget requirement, so they're best able to handle it in an emergency. But even if the feds aren't going to do it, there's no reason that the states can't. And the best benefit of the states doing it is that it gets done faster and it saves lives. The second best is that it saves money. The third best is that it shames the feds, and it might make them actually go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's going to take more representation from individuals like yourself. Regardless of what ultimately ends up happening in June, Virginia is much better for having you as one of their representatives. Any final thoughts? Obviously, everybody, carterforvirginia.com. Lee needs all the help he can get, especially, I'm sure, with phone banking would be a huge thing, text banking. Yes. Lee, definitely share your final thoughts.
Yeah.
We're very grateful to have you come on the show this evening.
Yeah, so right now, because I'm in the General Assembly and the General Assembly is in session, I'm actually prohibited from fundraising. But we absolutely have a dire need of volunteers.
Okay.
We've already got people making voter contacts on the phones. We just sued the Department of Elections and got a COVID safe petition signature collection process. They're going to be coming out with the details of that on February 5th. We started off with the premise that campaigns should not be super spreaders, and we sued to make that a reality, and we won. But Virginians need to know that this coming June, there is an opportunity to vote for someone that comes from the same kind of background that they do, that knows the same kinds of struggles that they do. They have an opportunity to vote for someone who is going to fight for them because he doesn't answer to the same kind of corporate donors that the other politicians do. I've never taken a single dime from for-profit corporations or industry interest groups. I never have, and I never will. I am in this fight for working Virginians because I am a working Virginian. I'm starting my car with this and a pair of pliers, right? And I'm running for governor. So if you want someone who is going to fight to protect working Virginians and put working Virginians in control of our own destiny, it's not going to be the multimillionaire in this race. It's not going to be the 3 lawyers in this race. It's going to be the electronics repairman who got into this to fix workers' comp.
Right. I think it's awesome.
Beautifully said. carterforvirginia.com. Lee Carter, State House Representative in the Commonwealth of Virginia, running to be the next governor of the state of Virginia.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us. And if you're up for it, we'd be happy to have you back when it gets closer to your election. And hopefully we'll have an even bigger platform by then.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Lee.
Thanks for coming on, Lee.
Bye.
All right. Take care.
Good man.
Yeah, I'm moving to Virginia if he wins.
Yeah,
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.